The first thing you see is a dollhouse, miniature rooms, tiny furniture, little figures frozen mid-action inside perfectly constructed scenes. A woman's hands moving through the rooms, adjusting details with the kind of obsessive precision that suggests this isn't a hobby. It's a compulsion. Annie Graham makes miniature dioramas for a living, recreates moments from her own life in miniature form. Tiny versions of real rooms, real events, real people reduced to small, controllable figures she can arrange exactly the way she wants them. Think about that for a second. A woman who processes her entire existence by recreating it in miniature, by making it small enough to hold, safe enough to look at directly. The film opens on one of those dioramas, and then the camera slowly pushes in through a window of the tiny house until the miniature bedroom becomes a real bedroom, and Annie's son, Peter, is waking up inside it. The line between the doll and the person, between the controlled, and the real. That line is what Hereditary spends 2.5 hours slowly, methodically, completely destroying. Ari Aster's 2018 debut film was marketed as a straightforward horror movie. Terrifying grandmother, grieving family, dark house in the woods. It is all of those things. But underneath the horror is something more specific and more disturbing than anything the trailer showed you. A film about inherited trauma so precisely constructed that by the time the supernatural elements fully arrive, you've already been unsettled for an hour by something that has nothing to do with demons. Let's start at the beginning. Annie's mother, Ellen, has just died. The film opens at her funeral, and the first thing that strikes you is Annie's eulogy. It's honest, in a way eulogies almost never are. She talks about her mother being secretive, difficult, private in a way that felt deliberately excluding. She talks about not fully knowing who her mother was. It's uncomfortable to listen to, the kind of honesty that makes other people in the room shift in their seats. And it tells you everything about the Graham family before the story has barely started. This is a family that has been sitting on things for a long time. Annie had a complicated relationship with her mother that she never resolved. Her husband, Steve, processes everything through calm practicality that functions as its own form of avoidance. Their teenage son, Peter, disappears into marijuana and distance. And their 13-year-old daughter, Charlie. Charlie is the one you keep watching. She makes clicking sounds with her tongue. She draws strange images in her sketchbook, figures that don't look quite right, faces assembled from wrong pieces. She ate a dead bird once. She worshipped her grandmother in a way the rest of the family found quietly unsettling. And she carries the weight of having been her grandmother's favorite, with a heaviness that goes beyond ordinary childhood attachment. Something passed between Ellen and Charlie. The film knows this from the very first frame. It just doesn't tell you what yet. The grief in the Graham house after Ellen's death is not clean or unified. It's the messy, fractured kind, where everyone is feeling something different, and nobody has the language to talk about it with anyone else. Annie throws herself into her work. More dioramas, more tiny rooms, more miniature control over the chaos she can't manage at full scale. Peter tries to feel nothing. Steve tries to hold everyone together by staying calm in ways that eventually start to look less like strength and more like refusal. And Charlie sits by the window, making her clicking sound and drawing in her sketchbook and waiting for something she seems to already know is coming. Then, about 20 minutes into the film, something happens that Ari Aster does without warning, without preparation, and without mercy. And the movie you thought you were watching ends, and a different film begins. Charlie is allergic to nuts. She goes to a party with Peter. There's chocolate cake. Someone didn't know. Charlie's throat closes, and Peter drives toward the hospital at full speed, with Charlie hanging out the window, gasping for air. And then, the thing that happens on that road. If you've seen Hereditary, you know exactly what moment this is. If you haven't, the film earns the right to show it to you the way Aster intended. What matters for this conversation is what comes after. The Graham family is now not the same family they were 20 minutes ago, and they never will be again. What Hereditary does in the following 30 minutes is more devastating than most horror films manage in their entire runtime. It sits in the aftermath, Peter waking up the morning after, the silence in the house before Annie finds out, the specific, unbearable quiet of a family that has experienced something so enormous that language has completely failed all of them. There's a dinner table scene that has no supernatural element whatsoever. Just Annie and Peter sitting across from each other. Grief and guilt and accusation building in the silence between them until Annie says something to her son that cannot be taken back. That scene is the most frightening thing in the film. Not the attic, not the telephone poles, not any of the imagery the horror community quotes online. A mother at a dinner table saying the thing to her child she can never unsay. Because that's real. That's something that actually happens in families. That's the kind of damage that echoes across generations. And Aster puts it right in the middle of a demon movie because that's exactly where it belongs. Annie finds her way to a grief support group, meets a woman named Joan, who seems warm and understanding and safe. Joan teaches Annie about seances, about communicating with the dead. And this is where the film begins its second movement. The shift from psychological horror to something older and stranger, and more specifically designed. Because Ellen was not simply a difficult private woman who had a complicated relationship with her daughter. Ellen was the leader of a cult devoted to Paimon, a lesser-known figure from a cult tradition, a king, and the specific gender of that word matters enormously to what the film is actually doing, who must be given a male host to fully manifest. Ellen spent her entire life arranging the pieces. Her daughter Annie was the vessel who would carry the bloodline forward without ever knowing what she was carrying. Charlie was prepared from birth as the initial host, but Charlie was always meant to be temporary. The male host was always going to be Peter. The whole film, the deaths, the grief, the seances, Joan's convenient appearance at exactly the right moment, was the completion of a ritual that began before any of these people were born. The Graham family didn't inherit trauma. They inherited a destination, and they were never told. If this is the kind of story that makes you see the film completely differently, stick around. Subscribe and hit the bell. More of this every week. No noise. Just the deep stuff. Toni Collette's performance as Annie is the axis. Everything else rotates around, and it deserves more than the single sentence most conversations give it. She is asked to play grief, guilt, rage, love, possession, and complete psychological dissolution, sometimes within the same scene. And she does it with a specificity that makes it genuinely difficult to watch because it doesn't look like acting. It looks like a woman actually breaking. There's a scene where Annie floats up to the ceiling, and somehow that supernatural image is less disturbing than the dinner table scene, because by the time the film reaches the supernatural, it has already shown you something more frightening underneath. A woman who loved her family and couldn't hold them together, who carried her mother's damage without knowing she was carrying it, who was used her entire life, her entire existence, as a vehicle for something she never consented to and never understood. Annie Graham is the most tragic figure in the film, not because of what happens to her, because of what was done to her before the film even started. The ending of Hereditary is one of those sequences that splits audiences cleanly down the middle. Some find it too much, too operatic, too explicitly supernatural after everything the first two acts built through psychological realism. Others And this is the reading that holds up on rewatch. See it as the only logical conclusion to everything the film was arguing. The ritual completes. Peter is claimed. Ellen's decapitated head is placed on an altar surrounded by the cult members who are always there, always watching, always one step ahead of the family's attempts to survive. And the final image, Peter crowned, worshipped, given a new name, is genuinely disturbing, not because of the imagery, but because of what it confirms. None of it was random. Every death, every accident, every moment of grief that felt like chaos was actually choreography. The Graham family was never making choices. They were following a script written before they existed by people who loved their grandmother for reasons that had nothing to do with her as a person. The horror of Hereditary isn't the demon. It's the realization that the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones who put you in the path of it. That the family you came from, the inheritance you never asked for, can contain things you have no idea are inside it. Until the night the lights go out, and something in the attic moves. Some horror films scare you for the night. Hereditary stays longer than that. It stays in the part of you that has ever looked at your family and wondered what you're carrying without knowing it. What patterns you're repeating that were set in motion before you were born. What things were decided for you before you were old enough to decide anything for yourself. The dollhouse at the beginning isn't just an image, it's the whole film. Little figures in rooms they didn't build, moving the way someone else arranged them, thinking they're free. Subscribe and leave the bell on. Next week we go somewhere just as deep. Drop one thing in the comments. What was the moment in Hereditary that actually got you? The dinner table, the road, the attic. I want to know where it broke through.